The restaurant was alive with noise plates clinking, soft music playing, people laughing, talking, enjoying their meals. Then suddenly, "Hey!" One loud voice cut through everything. Every head turned. Steven Seagal sat calmly at a corner table, halfway through his dinner. No spotlight, just a quiet man enjoying a peaceful evening. Across the room stood a cocky customer. Broad shoulders, loud laugh. The kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged. He stared straight at Steven. "You got a problem with me?" he shouted, smirking. Steven slowly raised his eyes. No anger, no fear, just calm awareness. "I don't," Steven replied softly. That calm response only made the man laugh harder. "Oh really?" he said. "Then why you looking at me like that?" People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Waiters froze mid-step. Something was wrong. Steven lowered his fork and wiped his hands slowly, never breaking eye contact. "I wasn't staring," he said. "But now you are." A few people chuckled nervously. The cocky customer didn't like that. He slammed his glass on the table and stood up.
"You think you're funny?"
"You think you're tough?" Steven didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't explain himself. That silence felt heavier than shouting. The man walked closer, confidence dripping from every step. "You old guys always think you're wise," he sneered. "But out here, respect is earned." Steven leaned back in his chair, relaxed. "Then sit down," he said calmly, "and earn yours by leaving me alone." The room went dead silent. Even the music seemed to fade. The man's friends stopped smiling. That was the moment everyone realized. This wasn't a normal argument. This wasn't two loud men clashing. This was ego walking straight toward discipline. The cocky customer laughed again, but this time his voice shook. "You don't tell me what to do." Steven stood up slowly, not rushed, not aggressive, just ready. And in that single moment, everyone in the restaurant felt it. Something bad was about to happen. And the man who started it had no idea who he was dealing with. Friday nights always brought chaos to the city. The restaurant was packed wall to wall. Families, couples, business groups, all squeezed together under warm lights and the smell of grilled food. Laughter bounced off the walls. Glasses clinked. Servers rushed between tables trying to keep up. At a small corner table sat Steven Seagal. No bodyguards. No flashy clothes, no attention. A plain black jacket rested on the back of his chair. His sleeves were rolled up slightly, revealing calm, steady hands. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if the noise around him didn't exist. To most people, he looked like just another older man enjoying dinner alone. Across the room was a completely different energy. The cocky customer leaned back in his chair, laughing too loud, his voice cutting through the restaurant again and again. He was surrounded by friends who fed his ego with smiles and nods. Every joke he told came with a slap on the table, every laugh demanding attention. He enjoyed being seen, he enjoyed being heard, and most of all, he enjoyed being feared. That's when his eyes drifted back to Steven. Steven hadn't moved, hadn't stared, hadn't reacted. That calm bothered him. "Who's that guy?" The cocky customer muttered to his friends, nodding toward Steven. "Why is he sitting like he owns the place?" One of his friends shrugged. "Probably just some old dude." The man smirked. Old, weak, irrelevant. That's what his mind decided. Steven lifted his glass and took a sip of water, eyes relaxed, posture open. Years of discipline sat quietly in the way he breathed, the way he observed without reacting. The cocky customer mistook that discipline for indifference. He stood up again. Chairs scraped the floor, drawing attention. A few people groaned softly, hoping the night wouldn't turn ugly. "Hey," the man called out louder now. "You deaf or something?" Steven didn't respond. Not immediately. He finished his sip, set the glass down carefully, then looked up. "Yes," he said. One word, calm, controlled. The man laughed loudly. "Don't yes me like that," he snapped. "You've been staring at me since I walked in." Steven shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I was enjoying my meal." A waiter nearby froze, sensing the tension. The cocky customer walked a few steps closer, invading Steven's space. "People like you always lie," he sneered. Think because you're older, you deserve respect. Stephen's expression didn't change. Your respect isn't demanded, he replied evenly. It's given. That answer hit harder than an insult. The man's friends shifted in their seats, suddenly unsure. Bro, sit down, one whispered. Just leave it. But ego doesn't listen to reason. The cocky customer leaned closer, his shadow falling over Stephen's table. You don't talk to me like that, he said. I've put people in the hospital for less. Stephen finally pushed his chair back slightly, not in fear, but to give space. I don't want trouble, he said calmly, but I won't accept disrespect. The restaurant was nearly silent now. Forks paused midair. Eyes locked onto the scene. The man scoffed. Look at you, he mocked, trying to sound tough. Stephen met his eyes, steady and unreadable. I'm not trying, he said. That was the moment. The moment the room changed, because something in Stephen's voice, quiet, grounded, unshaken, made people uneasy. This wasn't a man pretending to be strong. This was a man who had nothing to prove. And the cocky customer. He was walking straight into a lesson he would never forget. The silence inside the restaurant felt unnatural. It wasn't peaceful. It was tense, tight, heavy, suffocating. Every person in the room could feel it. The cocky customer stood inches from Stephen's table, chest puffed out, fists flexing like he wanted everyone to notice. His friends watched closely now, smiles gone, replaced by unease. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was turning into something dangerous. You hear how quiet it is, the man said loudly, spreading his arms. That's fear. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Stephen remained seated. Not slouched, not defensive, just calm. You should sit down, Stephen said again, voice low but clear. This doesn't end well for you. That sentence lit a fire. The man laughed sharply, pointing at Stephen. You hear this guy? He shouted to the room. He thinks he's threatening me. A nervous laugh echoed from somewhere in the back. Stephen slowly stood up this time, not to fight, but because the man had crossed into his space completely. He adjusted his chair calmly, making sure it didn't scrape the floor. Small details. Controlled movements people noticed. The cocky customer stepped back half a step, then his ego caught up. You standing now? He scoffed. About time. He leaned forward, face inches from Stephen's. Say it again, he whispered. Tell me what happens. Stephen looked him straight in the eyes. No challenge, no hate, just truth. You're angry because you feel small, Stephen said quietly. And you want an audience. That hit deeper than any punch. The man's jaw tightened. His face flushed red. Shut up, he snapped. Stephen didn't. You don't want a fight, he continued calmly. You want validation. The crowd went completely still. Even the staff behind the counter stopped moving. The cocky customer shoved Stephen's chest with one hand, not hard enough to knock him back, just enough to provoke. Gasps filled the room. That was it. The line was crossed. Stephen looked down at the man's hand on his chest, then back up. This is your last warning, he said. The man laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. You gonna cry, he mocked. Or you gonna swing? Stephen didn't raise his hands, didn't clench his fists. That scared people, because trained men don't rush. They wait. The cocky customer turned slightly toward his friends. You see this? He said loudly. Old man thinks he's a monk. That distraction cost him everything. In a blink, Stephen shifted his weight. Subtle, precise. The movement was so smooth it barely registered until it was over. The man grabbed at Stephen's jacket. Big mistake. Stephen trapped his wrist, twisted just enough to control. Not break. Pain flashed across the man's face instantly. Ah! The scream echoed. Stephen stepped in close, voice calm, almost instructional. I asked you to sit down, he said. The man tried to pull back. He couldn't. Stephen's grip tightened, not brutal, just absolute. The joint lock forced the man forward, down onto one knee. Gasps turned into shock. People stood up from their tables. Phones came out. The cocky customer's confidence evaporated. Let go, he shouted, panic creeping in. Stephen leaned in slightly. This ends now, he said. The man swung wildly with his free hand. He never landed. Stephen shifted, redirected the arm, and with one smooth motion placed the man flat on the floor. No punches. No chaos. Just control. The restaurant erupted into stunned silence. The cocky customer lay there, breathing hard, eyes wide. Not from pain alone, but from realization. He hadn't been fighting a normal man. He had attacked discipline. And discipline doesn't lose. Stephen stepped back slowly, hands relaxed at his sides. "This could have been avoided," he said calmly. And for the first time that night, the cocky customer felt something he'd never felt before. Fear. For a moment, no one moved. No applause, no shouting, no screaming. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows something people weren't prepared to witness. The cocky customer lay on the floor, chest rising fast, eyes wide and unfocused. His friends stood frozen, half out of their chairs, not knowing whether to help him or stay away. Stephen stood a few steps back, hands relaxed, breathing steady, as if nothing unusual had just happened. A glass shattered somewhere in the back. The sharp sound made people flinch, breaking the trance. Whispers began spreading through the room like wildfire. "Did you see that? He didn't even hit him." That was terrifying. The manager rushed out from behind the counter, face pale, hands raised. Hey, everyone calm down," he said, though his own voice trembled. "What's going on here?" Stephen didn't answer. He didn't need to. The scene spoke for itself. The cocky customer tried to sit up, wincing as he shifted his arm. One of his friends finally crouched beside him. "You okay, man?" he whispered. The man nodded weakly, though his face said otherwise. His confidence was gone. His loud laughter, his swagger, it had all drained out of him, leaving only embarrassment. Stephen looked down at him, not with anger, but with something worse, disappointment. "I told you to sit down," Stephen said calmly. "You chose not to." The words weren't cruel. They were final. The crowd watched closely now, not with excitement, but respect. People began to realize something important. This wasn't a street fight. This wasn't a brawl. This was discipline correcting ego. A woman near the window whispered to her husband. He never even raised his voice. The manager cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Stephen carefully, "do you want us to call the police?" Stephen shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "He's learned enough." That sentence hit harder than any threat. The cocky customer avoided Stephen's eyes. Shame crept into his expression as he realized every person in the restaurant had witnessed his downfall. Phones lowered. People weren't recording anymore. This wasn't entertainment. It was a lesson. Stephen reached for his jacket and calmly slipped it on. The simple action felt heavy, symbolic. Dinner was over. As he turned to leave, an older waiter stepped forward, hesitantly. "Sir," the waiter said softly, "thank you for not making it worse." Stephen gave a small nod. "Violence should be the last teacher," he replied. But sometimes ego refuses to listen. The cocky customer finally spoke, his voice low and broken. "I didn't know." Stephen stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "You didn't need to," he said. "You just needed respect." The man swallowed hard. Regret settled in, not because of the pain in his arm, but because of the humiliation in his heart. The restaurant slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed in whispers. Waiters moved cautiously. The music started again, softer this time, but something had changed. People sat differently, quieter, or aware. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Inside, the cocky customer sat in silence, surrounded by friends who no longer looked impressed. For the first time in a long time, he understood the cost of arrogance. And everyone who witnessed it left the restaurant carrying the same lesson. Real power doesn't shout. It waits. The door had barely closed behind Stephen when reality finally hit. Not just the pain, not just the embarrassment, but the truth. The restaurant manager stood frozen for a moment, eyes still fixed on the door Stephen had walked through. His face carried a strange mix of shock and disbelief, like he was replaying the scene in his head, frame by frame. Then it clicked. His eyes widened. "Oh my God," he whispered. One of the waiters noticed his reaction. "What is it?" she asked. The manager swallowed hard. That was Steven Seagal. The words spread faster than fire. "What? No way." "You're joking." The cocky customer looked up sharply. "Who?" he asked. His voice still shaky. The manager turned toward him slowly, almost carefully. "Steven Seagal," he repeated. "Movie star martial artist, one of the most trained fighters in the world." Silence slammed into the table like a weight. The man's face drained of color. No, he muttered. "That's not possible." But his friends were already pulling out their phones, not to record, but to confirm. One by one, screens lit up photos, videos, fighting demonstrations, interviews. Then someone said it out loud. "That's him." The cocky customer stared at the screen, then down at his own trembling hands. Reality crashed in. He hadn't challenged an ordinary man. He hadn't bullied someone weaker. He had picked a fight with a master, a man trained in control, discipline, and restraint. The laughter he'd carried all night twisted into shame, I thought. He began, then stopped. There was nothing left to say. The manager exhaled slowly and turned to the staff. "That explains everything," he said quietly. "The calm, the control." The cocky customer lowered his head. "I didn't know," he whispered again. One of his friends snapped back, anger mixed with embarrassment. "That doesn't matter," he said. "You don't treat people like that, famous or not." Those words hit harder than the fall. The man pressed his lips together, fighting the tightness in his chest. Across the room, a woman spoke softly to her table. "He warned him," she said, more than once. Another man nodded. "That wasn't violence," he added. "That was restraint." The cocky customer finally stood up slowly, carefully testing his arm. Pain flared. But it was nothing compared to the burning realization in his mind. He had mistaken silence for weakness, and paid for it publicly. The manager cleared his throat. "Sir," he said, addressing the cocky customer, "I think it's best if you leave for the night." No argument, no protest. The man nodded and slipped on his jacket. His friends followed quietly, no jokes, no laughter. As they reached the exit, the cocky customer paused and looked at the door Steven had walked through. For the first time, fear was gone. What remained was something heavier. Regret outside, the cool air hit his face. "I messed up," he said quietly. No one disagreed. Back inside, conversation slowly returned, but the energy was different now. People weren't excited. They were thoughtful. The manager looked around the room and said quietly, almost to himself, "Power doesn't look the way we expect." And somewhere down the street, Steven Seagal walked calmly into the night, unknown to most, unchanged by all. Because when discipline becomes a lifestyle, there's nothing left to prove. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm. Plates were cleared, orders resumed. The music crept back in softer than before. But nothing felt the same. People spoke in lower voices now, as if the walls themselves were listening. Every table carried the same unspoken thought. That man didn't win because he was aggressive. He won because he was controlled. The manager gathered the staff near the counter. "No more alcohol for tonight," he said quietly. "And make sure everyone's okay." One of the waiters nodded. "That man. He showed more restraint than anyone I've ever seen." The manager agreed. "That's real power," he said, knowing when to stop. Across town, Steven Seagal walked alone under the streetlights. His pace was unhurried. The night air was cool, calming. What had happened behind him was already fading. Not because it didn't matter, but because he refused to let ego live rent-free in his mind. To him, the incident was over the moment control was restored. He paused briefly at a crosswalk, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes calm. Cars passed. People hurried by, unaware of what had just taken place a few streets away. Discipline doesn't seek witnesses. Back at the restaurant, the cocky customer sat on the curb outside, head lowered, replaying every moment again and again. The stare, the warning, the silence. "I should have stopped," he muttered. One of his friends sighed. "He gave you every chance." The man nodded slowly. "That's the worst part," he said. He didn't want to hurt me. The realization settled deep. He had spent years believing loudness meant dominance, that intimidation meant respect, that fear equaled power. All of it collapsed in minutes. Inside, a young couple whispered at their table. "He could have seriously hurt him," the woman said. "But he didn't," her partner replied. "That's the difference." The manager approached an elderly server who had watched everything quietly. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled gently. "I've seen men fight before," she said. "I've never seen one end a fight before it really began." That sentence stuck. The night ended early. The restaurant closed its doors sooner than usual, not out of fear, but reflection. Some lessons need silence to sink in. Outside, the cocky customer finally stood up. His arms still ached, but something else hurt more. His pride. He looked at his reflection in a dark window. For the first time, he didn't like what he saw. "Next time," he said quietly, "I'll walk away." No one clapped, no one praised him. But growth doesn't need an audience. Across the city, Stephen reached his car and paused for a moment before getting in. He looked up at the sky, breathing slowly. Control, restraint, balance, principles learned long ago, reinforced once again. He drove off without thinking about applause, recognition, or revenge. Because true mastery isn't about defeating others. It's about mastering yourself. And somewhere behind him, a loud man learned the hardest lesson of his life. That real strength is calm, real power is quiet. And regret always arrives too late for ego. By the next morning, the incident had already become a story. Not a viral clip. Not a loud headline, but a quiet lesson passed from person to person. People who were in that restaurant didn't talk about punches or pain. They talked about control. About how one calm man stopped chaos without becoming it. Because what they witnessed wasn't violence. It was discipline. Steven Seagal never went back to that restaurant. He didn't check comments. He didn't wait for recognition. To him, the night was just another reminder of a truth he had lived by for decades. Ego looks for fights. Discipline avoids them. The cocky customer, however, carried the lesson everywhere. At work, he spoke less. At home, he listened more. In public, he thought twice before raising his voice. Not because he was afraid of Steven Seagal, but because he finally understood something deeper. Strength isn't loud. Weakness is. He remembered the warning he ignored, the calm voice that tried to stop him. The moment silence felt heavier than shouting. That silence followed him for weeks. Because real lessons don't fade. They reshape you. Most people think power comes from dominance, from winning arguments, from making others feel small. But that night proved something different. Power is walking away when your ego wants applause. Power is control when you have the ability to destroy. Power is choosing restraint when chaos invites you in. Steven didn't humiliate him for revenge. He didn't escalate for pride. He ended the situation because it needed to end. That's leadership, that's mastery, and that's why the lesson matters to all of us. Every day we face moments like that restaurant. Someone disrespects us. Someone tests us. Someone tries to provoke a reaction. And in those moments, we choose who we are. Do we let ego speak first? Or do we let discipline decide? Because once ego takes control, regret is never far behind. That night wasn't about fame. It wasn't about age. It wasn't about fighting. It was about misunderstanding silence. Too many people mistake calm for weakness. Too many confuse volume with strength. But the strongest people in the room are often the quietest. They don't need validation. They don't need to prove anything. They already know who they are. And when they move with purpose. So remember this, never judge someone by how quietly they sit. Never provoke someone who has nothing to prove. And never assume restraint means fear. Because some people don't fight often. But when they do, it's already over. Comment. Calm power if you believe real strength is quiet. Have you ever seen ego lose to discipline? Share your story. Tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters.